Welcome to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time. This is Masechet Baba Batra, and this week we are going to be reviewing. This is our 15th class, and this week we are going to be reviewing Daf 99 through 105. So we are well into our Masechet. And today we're going to start on Daf 99. If you remember, I'm going to say last week, but really 2 days ago, we ended off discussing the structure of the temple. And I mentioned it's really beautiful that we're learning it right before Yom Kippur, because Yom Kippur was the one day a year that the high priest, that the Kohen Gadol, would enter the Kodesh HaKodashim, the inner most room or the innermost hall of the temple, the Holy of Holies. And in that Holy of Holies was the Ark, the Aron. In the Ark are the tablets, and on top of the Ark, on top of the Aron, are the Kruvim. Kruvim are cherubs, and we're going to talk about them right now. So the Gemara tells us on Daf 99 that the structure of the Kodesh HaKodashim, of the Holy of Holies, it says that the upper 20 amot were empty. So too, the lower 10 amot were empty. Now, what does that mean? We know that the Aron, that the Ark, and the Kruvim were in the Kodesh HaKodashim, were in the Holy of Holies. So what does it mean that the area was empty? And here the Gemara tells us that the Aron and the Kruvim didn't take up any space. Now, in our physical world, that is impossible because we believe that all physical things take up physical space. My husband actually has a theory, which I think is fascinating. If you know Einstein's theories of relativity, so my husband's theory is that there is a theory of relativity when we get close to holiness. And he says that the closer you get to holiness, the less physical space you take up. And that is based on this Gemara on Daf 99, because literally the Gemara says there's a tradition that the Aron and the Kruvim didn't take up any space. Again, because it says that the Kruvim, the cherubs, were 10 amot from each wall, but there was only 20 amot in the room. So if they're 10 from each wall, they don't take up any space. So again, whether this is meant to be taken literally or figuratively, I think the point is that this room is the holiest room on the planet. And if it's the holiest room on the planet, there has to be a way, right? How does a physical space hold a spiritual, right, experience? So I think the Gemara is trying to say it doesn't, right? In this place, there's no physicality. But really, we know that there was a physical thing in this space. So the Gemara says, you're right, the Kruvim stand miraculously. Each wing, now the Kruvim looked, we'll talk about the face in a minute, but they had 2 wings. So there's 2 ways to visualize these Kruvim. One is I would say the common way to visualize it was that the Kruvims, kind of were sideways and their wings were above their heads. Another way to understand it is the wings were outstretched. So here the Gemara talks about the fact that each wing was 5 amot. And then again, remember, the width of the room is 20. If you have 2 kruvim, each wing is 5. So you have 5, 10, 15, 20. So they stood with their arms, out, their wings outstretched, and it spanned the entire room. Okay. Or, right, again, but then where's the space for the aron? And maybe their wings overlapped. Maybe they were bent. And then the Gemara talks about, we have 2 verses that speak about these kruvim. One of them says that they were face to face, panim el panim. And another one says that they faced east to the bite, right? They faced the house, the structure. And here we have a very famous midrash, a very famous explanation that basically it depended on the Jewish people. If the Jewish people were doing God's commandments and they were behaving, so then the kruvim were face to face. However, if the Jewish people were not doing the commandments, so then they were side by side, right? The idea is that the kruvim mirror the Jewish people's relationship with God. If it's a loving relationship, so then they're facing each other. And if it's not, then they are, side by side, but not facing each other, right? Or one idea is that maybe they were angled, so they were also facing each other, but also side by side. And the last thing that the Gemara tells us about the kruvim was that their faces looked like young children, which is where we get this idea of a cherub. Again, cherub is right, a kruv, cherub. That's where the word comes from. And that's this idea of angelic young faces with wings. So that comes from the Aron. Okay, let's go to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah tells us that if a person owns the cistern or a pit in someone else's property, so then you have the right to go there during normal daytime hours. You do not have a right to go there in the middle of the night and disrupt your neighbor on his property. You also are not allowed to bring your animals into the other person's property to give them water. Rather, you need to bring the water out to the animals. And the Mishnah tells us that both the owner of the property and the owner of the cistern need to lock up the cistern. So the Gemara is going to explain why do both of them need to lock up the cistern. So the owner of the cistern needs to make sure that nobody takes his water, so that makes sense. And the owner of the property also needs to put a lock on it so that the owner of the cistern needs him to be home so that he can get to his water. It's almost like in the safe with the security, right? The 2 keys, right? You have a key and then the bank has a key. So it's the same thing here. We want to make sure that there's no impropriety, and therefore you need both of them to unlock it so that he can get to his water. Okay, we're going to have a similar parallel Mishnah. If a person has a garden that's behind his neighbor's garden, so again, the only way to get to his garden is through the neighbor. So he has permission to go through the garden, but again, only during daytime hours. And he has to, right, again, let's say it's a vegetable garden. He has to bring the vegetables to the merchants outside. You can't bring the merchants traipsing through the other person's property. And you can't use this path to get to another field, right? You can use it to get to your garden. You can't use it as a shortcut to go somewhere else. The owner of garden one, right, the outer one, can plant on the path. But again, the person is allowed to walk on that path. If the path is on the side, so then, right, if it won't bother anybody, you can go there anytime and you can bring merchants in, but you can't use it to go to another field. And if it's on the side, neither person can use that land to plant on, right? Because it's seen as both of their lands. So now the Gemara explains another case. Let's say one person owns a field and another person buys the rights to the irrigation channel that goes through that field. So again, how much land do you get around this irrigation channel? Again, it's like a ditch that they would open up so that the water can flow into the other property. So you get 2 amot for the actual canal. Again, amma is like from the tip of your finger to your elbow. So you get 2 amot for the canal and 1 amma on either side. And if this canal is for a pond, right, or like a small area of water, like for laundry or for the animals to eat, to drink, so then it's only 1 amma wide, and you get half an amma on either side. The owner of the field is allowed to plant trees or seeds on the bank of this water canal. The idea is that trees, their roots go straight down. We're not worried that it's going to go into the canal and erode the canal. The canal owner can fix the bank of this canal using dirt from the field, because the idea is that the earth on the field came from the bank, right? So you can like fix it from the dirt on the field, or you can do it because the field owner assumed that if he's giving him the rights to the land, he can have like the dirt that is around that area. Okay, next, next Mishnah, a person has a public path that goes through his field, right? So imagine he has a field, but there's a path that everyone uses to get to, I don't know, the supermarket, right? So this is a path that everybody knows. It's the way to get to the supermarket. The person who owns the field can't decide to just move the path to another area, right? Meaning there's this concept in halacha that if the public has used this area, they've acquired it literally with their feet. And the owner who let them, use this path is not allowed to move it. Therefore, if he does move it, not only does he give them this new path, but he doesn't lose the old path, meaning they now have 2 ways to get to the supermarket because he wasn't allowed to make this decision. Let's say a person bought a path. How wide is a path? Right, again, let's say I say, I live behind you. I would love to pay you for the rights to walk across your lawn to get to my house. And you say, okay, fine, I'll give you a path. Path is described as 4 amot. So it's about 2 meters wide. I don't know what that is in feet, but I don't know. A path, right? So a path that one person can walk through. Let's say, and again, just to remind ourselves, the Mishnayot that we're learning now is sales, right? So if I'm buying or I'm selling something, we need to standardize the words that we're using, right? So if I say I want to buy a path, the Mishnah is telling me how wide a path is. And now let's say I want to buy a road. I feel like we're playing Monopoly, or other, I don't know, oh, Ticket to Ride, I think they buy roads and I don't know, right? When do you buy, if you're buying a road, right? This is called like a public street. It has to be 16 amot wide. If you're buying a derech hamelech, I think we would call it like a super highway. It literally means the road for the king, right? So the king is allowed to create roads wherever he goes, and therefore it could be as wide as he wants, right? The king has that power. And if you're buying a path to a grave, also, there's no limit, because let's say you have a lot of people going to a funeral. We want to make sure that as many people that want to go to the funeral can go to the funeral, and therefore they can create the path, as wide as they want. And there's something called a ma'amad. We'll get to this. A ma'amad is 4 kav. So we're going to explain all of these things. Okay, so the Gemara tells us, and we've seen this before, that a person cannot take the law into their own hands, even if there's a loss for him. Therefore, the person can't chase people away, right? Again, I'm not saying that if, 5 of your neighbors decide to use your lawn as a shortcut, that's not okay. But if there is a path that goes through your property, that's something that existed already for a long time, you're not allowed to take it away from the path, from the public. Therefore, the public gets both of those paths. Daf 100 tells us, right, again, why can't he get back the second path? Maybe you'll say, okay, fine, he wasn't allowed to move it, give him back the second path. So we say if it was given to the public, so then they can keep it, right? He decided to give it to them, they want it, so they can keep it. Or only because they lost the other path, can they get this path? And therefore they only get one, not both. Okay, and this is how we see that if someone is walking on a field, that is a chazaka. If you remember, chazaka means it shows that you have the right to be there, and it becomes your path, and that's okay. How do we know that walking in the land means you're acquiring it? Right? It's from right. Hashem, God tells Abraham to walk the length and the breadth of Eretz Yisrael, of Israel, and that is how he was going to acquire it. Or the Gemara says maybe he just told him to walk on it so that it would be easier for his descendants to conquer it. Maybe it's not the way to conquer it. So that's a machloket in our Gemara. If you have a path through a vineyard, you can acquire it by walking through. It has to be wide enough to be able to walk. So again, right, the width of a person, let's say. So therefore, again, a private path needs to be wide for, let's say, if it's going to be for a donkey and its load to be able to, walk down this path. And therefore, that's how wide it needs to be. A road from one city to another city, if it's only for those residents, meaning it's like a private intercity road, but it's not for anybody to use, right? It's not a highway, but it's only for those residents. So then it needs to have 2 lanes, right? Coming and going. So it needs to be 8 amot wide, right? 4 going and 4 coming. If it's, as we said, if it's like a public road, it needs to be 16 amot wide. So I guess it's like 2 lanes in each direction. If you have a road to the Ir Miklat, the Ir Miklat is the city of refuge. I'm not sure if I think we have learned it, but the city of refuge was the city where if a person killed somebody by accident, he's allowed to run to this city, and he needs to stay in this city, and it protects him from the relatives of the person that was killed, because if they find him on the road, they're actually allowed to avenge the death of their relative. However, if he goes to this Ir Miklat, he is safe, and he can stay there till the Kohen Gadol, till the high priest, whoever is the high priest at the time, till he dies. When he dies, that all the people in the Ir Miklat are allowed to come out, and the relatives are not allowed to kill them anymore. So because we want to make it easy for this person to run to the city, the road to the city is 32 amot wide, right? So that's 4 lanes each way, because we want to make sure that he can get there as fast as possible. Okay, we said the king can take any land he wants to make a path. There's no size, and also the path to a grave. There is no minimum. There's no, I guess we'll say, maximum amount. We want to honor the deceased, and therefore we want to encourage as many people as possible to come to the funeral. Now, since we mentioned how the idea of a grave, the Gemara is now going to talk about burial in the time of the Mishnah and in the Gemara. In the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, there were family crypts, and we're going to see a picture of that in a minute. If a person sold their family crypt, or the area or the path to it, the family is allowed to come and bury their person there anyway, even if it's against the will of the buyer. The family member is not allowed to sell the family crypt. As we know, in Judaism, we take burial very seriously. It is something that is a mitzvah, and not only is it a mitzvah, it is done as quickly as possible. I'm not sure if you always have that in America, but in Israel, people try to bury people as soon as possible, meaning they try to do it before sunset, and if they can't, they won't wait till the next day. They'll bury people at night. Unfortunately, for whatever circumstances, there could be funerals at 8 p.m., 10 p.m. There's an idea that we want to have a funeral as soon as possible for the sanctity of the body, for the sanctity of the soul. And therefore, we're going to see more about the burial. And here the Gemara talks about, if you remember, we have this concept of a ma'amad. What is a ma'amad? So the Gemara says that you need at least 7 ma'amadim for the dead. And these were places that they would stop the funeral procession, and they would cry, and they would sometimes reflect after the funeral. This is something that they did as part of the funeral procession. It was not done on Shabbat, and you only do these ma'amadot for relatives and on the first day, and only in a place where it is the custom, and it's only done in the cemetery. If the funeral was right before Shabbat, so then you could end up in the cemetery on Shabbat, and therefore the Gemara needed to teach that you were not allowed to do it on Shabbat. Okay, our next Mishnah is going to get into the burial customs in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara. In the time of the Mishnah, they would bury people in crypts, right? This is underground, maybe in a cave. And we are going to discuss the various structures of these crypts. So there was a main area here, where it says the word crypt. That's the main area. That's called the me'ara, which literally means the cave. So let's say you sell a place for a crypt or you buy it. How big does it need to be? So the main chamber, the me'ara, needs to be 4 by 6 amot, and then you need the area. You need to have enough space for 8 recesses, right? The idea is that these were, I don't want to use the word tunnels, like holes that were dug into the cave, and you would place the body, right, horizontally in these recesses. So you can see here, there are 8, 3 on each side and 2 at the end. That's why you need a length of 4 amot. You need 3 amot plus, right, for a body is about 3 amot plus 1 for the coffin. So that is 4. Okay, the height of each recess needs to be 7 tfachim. The idea is that the coffin was 6 tfachim, plus you need one tefach space above the aron. If you remember, the concept of impurity, of tum'ah, literally goes, straight up. But if you have a tefach of space in between the coffin and the grave, so then it blocks the tumah from going up. Okay, Daf 101 gives us another option. Hold on 1 minute. Wait, we'll get to this picture in 1 second. Okay, if you see the upper picture here, wait, hold on, I want to make sure can everyone see the upper picture? Okay, so you see the upper picture, instead of having 3 and 3 and 2 on the top. So another option is that the main chamber, the me'ara, was actually 6 by 8, and you're going to have 13 recesses. How 13? 4 on each side, 3 on the opposite entrance, and then 1 on either side of the entrance. And we'll talk about those. Those are like the diagonals. We're going to talk about those in a minute. You also need to have, if you look at the second picture where it says bet, a second picture, you see how it has, it looks like an L. You have a me'ara on the top, you have a me'ara on the side, and in between the two is something called a chatzer. A chatzer was like space that connected two me'arot, right? 2 crypts. So the chatzer has to be 6 by 6, and that's going to be the area for people to come to the funeral. So again, as we said, you can have like 2 me'arot opening, 1 on either side of the chatzer, or the Gemara gives us an even more complicated thing. So you see here on the top picture shows 2 me'arot, 2 crypts with a chatzer in the middle. If you look at the bottom page, it gets even more, the bottom picture gets even more complicated. You can have 4 crypts, right? Up, north, south, east, west, with the chatzer in the middle. Now, this is going to get very complicated because you can see that some things overlap. How could we have people, right? How can you have things overlapping in the middle? The Gemara is going to talk about that in a minute. The Gemara says also, it depends on the rock or the soil. If you have softer soil, you need more space between the graves. If it's stronger, it can be closer together. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain how did we get 13? Where are the two extra ones? One option is that they're by the entrance. The other option is that they are on the opposite side of the wall. And again, we're concerned for overlap, like you can see here. So the Gemara says there are different ways to have these overlaps. As you can see here at the bottom, Gimel, if you put them all on an angle, right, instead of them being at right angles to each other, you can angle all of them. There's another option given, right? So here's that picture again of the courtyard in the middle with the crypts going around, basically in all directions. And here you see the options of things going, of graves going on an angle. Then the Gemara says, wait, if it goes on an angle, they're going to be much shorter, right? Because if it's the same length as the ones on the side, they would, protrude. It would be much longer. So those were much shorter. So the Gemara actually says that these shorter ones in the corner were actually for stillborns, for stillbirths, and those are going to be shorter, smaller graves, and therefore you can put them on an angle. Therefore, the Gemara tells us, why is this all important? One was for a sale, right? You have to know what you're buying. Another is because if you find a grave, right? Let's say you're digging in your field and you find a grave, and the person is buried in the Jewish way, meaning horizontally, and their arms were crossed over their body. So then, if it's just one grave, we say that, somebody, again, as I said it before, we take burial very seriously, and someone might have walked by and seen a dead person, so they just, buried them where they were, but with the intent that they were going to move them into the cemetery later on. So let's say you find one body, you're allowed to move that body somewhere else, let's say to the cemetery, right? We're going to see the concept is that if somebody was buried purposefully in a certain area, you're not allowed to move the body. But if you have reason to believe that the person was only buried there temporarily, you are allowed to move the body. So here, again, as we said, one would think that you would want to bury a body in the cemetery. Why would someone not bury in the cemetery? It was on the side of the road. It was Erev Shabbat. They didn't know who they were. So they hastily buried the body. Therefore, you can move that body to a cemetery. The same thing is if you found two bodies. Daf 102 tells us, let's say you found three bodies. Now it depends. If they are within 4 and 8 amot of each other, we assume that this is actually a me'ara, right? This is actually a crypt, right? Again, from one side to the other side of the crypt is between 4 and 8 amot. Therefore, we assume that they were buried on purpose. So this is actually a cemetery or a crypt, and therefore you're not allowed to move the bodies. Right? Maybe they're buried on the short wall or the long wall. Therefore, you have to check 20 amot around these bodies, because again, why 20 amot? Go back to our, right, what is the largest space, right? Look at the bottom picture. The largest space from one end of the crypt through the courtyard to the next crypt and go all the way to the end is 20 amot. And therefore, if you measure 20 amot and you don't find any body, so then, okay, and the rest of the area you can use. But if you find another body at 20, so now you have to check another 20. And maybe there are multiple crypts in this area. And then the Gemara talks about right, all the math. Is it 20? Is it 22? Is it 18? Maybe they were closer together. Maybe they were further apart. But again, you need to, the Gemara tells us we have to check 20 amot, and then we can determine if there was a crypt or a cemetery in this area. Okay, that is the end of the 6th chapter of Bava Batra. We are now going to move on to the 7th chapter. Here we're going to talk about selling land and how we measure the land for the sale. Okay, so the Mishnah tells us, if a person sells a beit kor, again, a beit kor is a certain size of a field, and they say that they're buying, or they're selling it, or they're buying it for planting. If there are ditches or large rocks that are 10 tfachim high or deep, then those areas are not measured with the land, right? If I want to buy a field, but there's a huge ditch in the middle, so you have to give me extra field, right? You need to give me extra planting space because I can't plant in a ditch. Now, really, I could plant in a ditch, but I don't want to plant in a ditch. So if it's 10 tfachim, it doesn't count. If it's smaller than 10 tfachim, it gets included in the sale, right? When you buy a field, there are going to be rocks, there's going to be maybe some cracks. We assume that certain things are natural, right? Naturally occurring. Now, if a person said, I'm going to sell you about a beit kor, right? Approximately, then even if you have a ditch that's 10 tfachim, it gets included in the measurements, right? Because when you said approximately, it meant approximately, and therefore other things can be included in the measurement. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to explain how we understand these ditches, right? Are these ditches part of the land or not? And here the Gemara starts to talk about sanctifying land, right? Let's say I decide I'm going to sanctify my land. If I have an area, right, that's again 10 tfachim deep or 10 tfachim high, it's not counted as part of the field that I sanctified, and it has a different law. It's related to differently. Let's say, so one opinion is that the ditches are filled with water. That's why they can't be planted. Therefore, they're like the rocks, and therefore they're not seen as part of the land. They're seen as a separate area. If the ditches are smaller than 10 tfachim, they're just seen as cracks in the land, and then it's part of the field. Let's say a person wants a full field, not pieces of a field. Therefore, even if the ditch is empty, right, they don't want to plant in a ditch. Therefore, it doesn't get counted in the measurements. Okay, again, rocks. Now, again, remember, I want a field that I can plant. If it's filled with rocks, I can't plant it. It's very rocky. It's not good terrain. So how many rocks do I have to accept as part of my field before it becomes, right, not a plantable, that's not a word, not a, whatever the word is, not a, whatever the word is for plantable field. Okay, so you have a maximum of arable, Interesting. Okay. A maximum of 4 kav of rocks is acceptable. More than that is too much. Less than that, right? Again, it needs to be proportionate to the amount of land that you're buying. Let's say the rocks are scattered all around my field. Okay, if they're scattered, it's okay. However, asks the Gemara, what happens? Wait, not this one. What happens if the rocks are in a certain pattern? Now, what's the idea? If the rocks are in a pattern, they are preventing me from plowing my field. Remember, in a field, I want to be able to go up and down the field, right, with my plow. Now, if every time I go up and down the field, I'm going to hit a rock, that's bad for my plow, and I can't plow the area. So the Gemara says it's based on, right, the pattern, right? So let's say you have a circle, maybe that would be okay because I can just put the plow in the middle of the circle and I can plow the circle, and then you can plow around the circle. Let's say you have lines, right? So then again, that's one thing. Let's say you have, the Gemara calls the top right one, bull's horns, right? It looks like bull's horns. So the Gemara says, that seems to be problematic. It's not easy to get around. And the last one is that M on the bottom, or W, that's very hard to plow. And that seems to be, not fun for the farmer. Let's say I have one rock, but it's right outside or on the boundary. That's not measured as part of the field. Only if it's surrounded by land all around, then the question is, does it get counted or not? And we are left with tiku. Okay, next Mishnah. The Mishnah says, right, a person, okay, so let's go back for a minute, right? In the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, how did they measure land, right? So they basically had a rope, and the rope had knots, right? Let's say every amma or every 2 amot. And that's how people measured land, using these ropes, right? If you remember, we once discussed the idea that in the summer, it's a different length than in the winter. Remember, we talked about it being like, if it's moist versus if it's dry. So you have to be very careful on how you measure your land. So the Mishnah tells us, a person says, I'm going to sell you a beit kor of land measured by a rope. We would use the word exactly. I'm going to sell you exactly a beit kor. So then it has to be exact. This is what I bought. This is what I want. Now, if he said, I'm going to sell it to you, right, approximately a beit kor, right, give or take a little bit, we would say. So then it could be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, up to a quarter kav, right? A quarter kav is going to be the wiggle room in either way, right? And if you give, right, extra, you have to either pay for the extra land or give back the land, right? So again, up to a quarter kav, nobody has to pay. It's like bonus, but above a quarter kav, you need to either pay for the extra land or return the land. Okay, if it's 9 kav over, right, more than what you said you were going to give, you have to return the land, no matter what. If it's less, then it's not seen as an important, right? It's not seen as a field in and of itself, and therefore you can either return the land or pay for it. Okay, so now the Gemara on Daf 104 explains that again, remember we had in the Mishnah 2 cases, exact, give or take, right, approximate. what happens if you just said beit kor, right? In the Gemara, we call this stam. Stam means I didn't specify if it was approximate or exact. I just said beit kor. So which one is it? Exact or approximate? Now, we can't learn from our Mishnah because our Mishnah gives us two extremes. So we don't know what happens in the middle. So one Breita says that if you just use the word beit kor, right, again, you can call it 10 acres, right? Either it's exactly 10 acres or approximately 10 acres. But if I just say 10 acres, what do I mean? Right, so one opinion is it means approximately. Another opinion is it means exact, right? And again, like all Gemara, we have numerous opinions. Now the Gemara says, if there's a mistake of more than 7.5 kav, before we said 9, we're going to get there, but let's say there's a mistake of more than 7.5 kav, you have to return the land. And this is to the benefit of the buyer, right? Because the buyer doesn't want to pay more. We agreed on a price. This is what I want. That's it. Or maybe it also benefits the seller, right? Because again, the seller is going to have a final say. He can decide if he wants money back, right? Meaning I gave you extra money, so extra land, so compensate me for it. Or he can say, you know what, you don't want to pay for it. Great, give me my field back, or just the extra. The issue is, what if the price of the land went up or down since the original agreement? And that's what the Gemara is talking about, where the sometimes the buyer has the upper hand, and sometimes the seller. Okay, now we used the idea of a 9 and 7.5. So now the Gemara explains 9 kav mistake. The buyer can return it because it's seen as a standalone, or it's seen as a significant land. If it's 7.5 kav mistake, so that is per core, right? Again, a core, you can see here of these, like all the squares. That is right. It says 6 by 5 se'ah. So that's beit core. And here, if it's 7.5 kav per every core, then you get to return it. Let's say a person sold 1 core, and if there was 9 extra, you have to return it. If a person sold 2 core, so then if there's 9 extra, you don't need to return it, because we're going to say that it's proportionate. Now, one opinion is that it's proportionate to the amount of land that you bought. Others say it is not proportionate. It is that is the number, and if you go over, even if you bought a huge field, you need to return it. Now, the Gemara also told the Mishnah also told us that based on what the land is, you have a certain amount of like wiggle room, right? So for a field, it's going to be bigger. For a garden, which is smaller, there's a smaller, right, margin of error, basically. Okay. Let's say you sold 1 field next to your own field, right? So you had a really big field. You realized you don't need the whole thing, so you decide to sell half of it. If there's extra that you gave the person, they have to return it. It doesn't matter how much extra, because it is attached to your land. So obviously, if I can plow my field and then go into that little extra land, I'm going to want to do that. Therefore, even if it's a little bit over, you need to return it. Okay, and then we said that if you exceed the maximum, you have to return not only the excess, but anything that you added to the original measurement. Okay, for our last daf today, daf 105, the Mishnah says, let's say a person says, I'm going to sell you exactly 10 acres, more or less. Now, those two statements do not go together. So what did the person mean? So Ben Nanas, who's the one who authored this Mishnah, says that the second statement cancels out the first statement. Therefore, if I say exactly more or less, it means more or less, right? Not exact. And if I say more or less exactly, so then it means exactly, right? We go according to the second statement. So now the Gemara tells us that the sages actually disagree with this Mishnah, and they say, we're not sure what you meant, right? More or less exact. And when we're not sure, we're actually going to split the difference, right? And the Gemara gives us another case. The case is a person rents a bathhouse, and he says, I'm going to pay you 12 dinarim to rent this for a year, 1 dinar per month. Now, let's say this is a leap year. And now if I say 1 dinar per month, this year actually has 13 months, right? In a Jewish leap year, we add a month. So if I say 1 dinar a month, you have to pay for the extra month. But if I say 12 dinar a year, I do not have to pay for the extra month. So what happens when he says both? So the Gemara says they have to split the rent of the leap month, right? The extra month, they split it. That means we do not go according to the second statement, right? We're not sure what the person meant, therefore we split it. So the Gemara says, well, maybe it's different because here the second statement isn't, right? It could be seen as a contradiction to the first part, but it could also be explaining it. I'm going to pay you 12 for the year, 1 for every month, because generally a year has 12 months. Am I explaining what I meant? Or am I saying, no, I'm going to pay you 1 per month, because really maybe there's going to be 13 months, right? And I'm not going to pay 12 for the year, right? That's the question. So the sages say we actually follow the statement that gives the buyer the less amount, right? And therefore, when we said that you're going to split the last month, it depends when they came to court. If they came to court during that leap month, right, Adar Sheni, right, the second Adar, so then that's when they split it. If they came to court at the beginning of Adar, so then the landlord gets the whole month of rent. And if they come at the end of Adar, the tenant gets to keep the money, right? And again, this is different from our Mishnah because each one has like a hold to right on the money. And therefore, with our sale, also, right, the buyer and the seller each have a hold on the money. And the Gemara concludes that when we have these two seemingly contradictory statements, we go according to the last statement. So that is what we have for today. I want to wish everyone first of all, a Shavua Tov and a Gmar Chatima Tova. And I wish everyone a very meaningful Yom Kippur. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we will meet next week on Tuesday night, right before Sukkot starts. Sukkot is Wednesday night, so we're going to meet Tuesday night. So wishing everyone a Chag Sameach. I'm happy to open up if you have a few questions. I'm happy to open it up. Yes.
It's not a question. Would you please give me, when you have time, give me the reference for when the cherub, everybody, when people Israel are in line with Hashem's will, they're together, and if not, because I'd like to read up on it a little more.
That was on Daf 99.
Daf 99, but everything that you know about is in 99. It's not other places.
The statement is there. You can look at different commentaries. Where if you're looking on Sefaria,
Yeah.
so if you click on the portion that you're reading, and you're in English,
It might go.
it will
Yeah.
give you commentaries, so you
Okay.
can look.
Bava
You
Batra
can look there.
99.
So
Yeah.
Daf 99A,
Thank you.
99A, the
A.
beginning.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Mm.
Any other comments? Any other questions?
Is keeping you all in prayer and good,
Mhm.
still good anticipation. Everything is going to work out just fine, and we're all in this together, and we are quite united all over the world.
Thank you so much. That does mean, it really means a lot, and we feel the love here, and we really do know that everyone around the world is thinking about us and praying for us, and we really do appreciate it. So thank you so much, and wishing you a meaningful Yom Kippur, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Yes, the Amalekites are everywhere, so prayers go for all of us.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Thank
Have
you.
a good week, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Marta.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.